Four things can be true at the same time. Star pass rusher Micah Parsons wants a trade out of Dallas. The Jets should be interested. The Jets probably will not be interested, and it's okay. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, August 4th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Our episode today is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. We have a busy show today. We're going to talk about why you should not be obsessed with who's up and who's down at Jets training camp on a day-to-day basis. Over the weekend, we had a great example as to why this is the case. We're going to talk about a potential shuffle on the offensive line caused by an injury and all the implications that could come from that. But we're going to begin by talking about the top story in the NFL, and that is superstar pass rusher Micah Parsons asking for a trade from the Dallas Cowboys. And if you've been following this saga over the last couple of months, Micah Parsons is entering the final year of his rookie contract. He wants a new contract. He's been a phenomenal pass rusher in Dallas, and the Cowboys have done everything wrong over the last couple of months. And a lot of this goes back to the owner, Jerry Jones, who has been reluctant to give Parsons a deal. He's made comments about why he's reluctant to give Parsons a deal. It's almost Woody Johnson-esque. I frequently make a joke that the NFL should give out an award each year to the owner who was most destructive. I call it the Woody Johnson Award. If the Woody Johnson Award existed, I think it would be clear right now that Jerry Jones has built up an insurmountable lead between the way he's handled Parsons, promoting Brian Schottenheimer to head coach. It's been an ugly time in Dallas. And part of me is delighted because for once an owner's destroying his team and it's not Woody Johnson. Now, Parsons' career is off to a historic start. In fact, I actually looked this up on Friday. There are only four players who have more sacks through their first four NFL seasons than Micah Parsons. And they are Reggie White, J.J. Watt, DeMarcus Ware, and Derek Thomas. Three of those four guys are in the Hall of Fame. The only one who's not is J.J. Watt. And the reason J.J. Watt's not in the Hall of Fame is he's just not eligible yet. He only retired a couple of years ago. The day J.J. Watt is eligible, he will be in the Hall of Fame. So this is the era Micah Parsons is in. Micah Parsons, 3 of his first 4 seasons, has been a top 3 vote getter in the Defensive Player of the Year award. So I think all the other 31 teams right now are asking themselves, should we be interested in Micah Parsons? And I would say for all 31 teams, including the Jets, the answer is yes. One of the things with the Jets you notice is that the Jets love to collect big name players. This has been true, obviously, over the last 2 years, but it's been true for a long time. It even predates Woody Johnson. This is around the time of the year you have the Hall of Fame ceremony. And one fact that comes up around this time of year is how many players had a cup of coffee with the Jets at their end of their career and ended up in the Hall of Fame. You could go all the way back to like the 90s, Ronnie Lott, and then Art Monk was with the Jets near the end of his career. And, the list of players goes on. We could talk Brett Favre. We could talk LaDainian Tomlinson. We could talk Jason Taylor, the son of the Jets' second round pick this year, Mason Taylor, of course, Aaron Rodgers. The list is just an enormous list of players. Brett Favre, Hall of Fame players who had a brief stint with the Jets at the end of their careers. And that's because the Jets are always obsessed with like the buzz. I think it's true that all New York teams really, really focus on trying to generate big name acquisitions to get big headlines. But it's truer of the Jets than any other team. The problem with the Jets is they always get these guys at the end of their careers. They seldom acquire a premium player in his prime. I mean, the only real examples of that I can come up with are Curtis Martin and Kevin Mawai, both of whom they got in the 1998 offseason, both of whom ended up being Hall of Fame players. So, people may say, well, the Jets, Jets should not be interested in Parsons because look at the last couple of years, they brought in all these big names and they failed. Well, they brought in all these big names and they failed because these guys were, in their 30s. These guys were past their prime. If you trade for Micah Parsons right now, you're getting a guy who's in his prime years. And he probably has a lot of good years in front of him. There's never any guarantee for how a player is going to perform in the future. But Parsons is about as good a bet as possible because he's off to such a historic start. He's been such a dominant player. And Parsons is one of the few players in the NFL I think would be worth giving up multiple first round picks to obtain because his anticipated level of play over the next couple of years is so high. I'm a big preacher and big believer in building through the draft, and there's a reason for that. In the NFL, great players usually aren't available. Usually, the guys who become available are second tier type guys. The superstars typically re-sign with their team, and there are lots of dynamics at play that lead to that in the NFL. If players like Micah Parsons were regularly available, there would be other options to building through the draft. This is a true exception to the rule, a truly outstanding talent. Now, I know some people might say, well, Jets need their first round picks to draft a quarterback. And to that, I would say, if you had a choice between, if you looked at the 32 teams and had a choice between Micah Parsons and that team's quarterback, you take the quarterback less than half the time. I mean, I actually went through that list myself. There were 12 quarterbacks I would choose over Micah Parsons if I had the choice. Now, there are a couple, you may have an argument with one or two of my choices, but I don't think you could say that Micah Parsons is less valuable than half. I don't think you could say more than half the quarterbacks in the league are more valuable than Micah Parsons. He's just such a difference maker. And yeah, the Jets have bigger needs on offense than they do on defense. In an ideal world, it would be an elite level receiver who would become available, but Jamar Chase is not available. Justin Jefferson's not available. These guys aren't going to become available. One way to work with an offense that may struggle is just build up your defense. If you added Micah Parsons to rush the passer along with Quinnen Williams also getting after the quarterback with Sauce Gardner in coverage, you'd have a defense that could be dominant. If you added Micah Parsons to the Jets this year, that might be a defense that could carry you to the playoffs. It actually may be a defense that surpasses even what Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich did in 2022 and 2023. So for me, this is like the rare case where the big name player actually would make sense. That said, I don't think the Jets are going to pursue Micah Parsons. It just would cut against everything Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji have done since they arrived. I think the way Glenn and Muji view this is their number one job is to fix the Jets culture, which was broken last year. And part of the reason it was broken was there were too many big name players who were out for themselves. And they focused on bringing in guys who are going to work hard, guys who are going to buy into the Jets program. And you've seen that this offseason. There were not a lot of big ticket moves. And probably the biggest move the Jets made were just giving internal players new contracts. Jamie and Sherwood first back in March. Then over the last couple of weeks, Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson. There's always a possibility you make an exception. I would make an exception for Micah Parsons. And usually I'm against giving up a ton of draft picks for a big name player, but this is an exception because he's just so good and he's in the prime of his career and he plays an important position. I don't know that Glenn and Muji are going to do that, but you know what? It's not the end of the world if they don't. I think I'm a big believer in the idea that you can always recover from the player you don't get. Okay, we don't trade draft picks for Micah Parsons. Well, if we hit on those picks, we'll be fine. And there's something to be said for the idea of building around your homegrown talent and supplementing that core. It's something the Jets have not done the last couple of years when they probably should have. I think that ultimately at the end of the day, the Jets should be interested in Micah Parsons. The Jets probably won't be interested in Micah Parsons. And their lack of interest in Micah Parsons is not going to be something that prevents them from being competitive if they use their resources wisely going forward. So it'll be very interesting to see how that situation plays out in Dallas. I don't expect the Jets to be involved, though, even though I think it would be a good idea. I think this is the rare case where it actually would make sense. They had you on the Locked On Jets podcast. We're going to try to make sense of the Jets' offensive line. Jets suffered a pretty minor injury last week, and it could lead to a bit of a shuffle up front. It could lead to a position change for one of the guys who was a standout for the Jets last year. We'll dive into that as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Time to fuel it up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink minus the alcohol into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. And let's be honest, some days on the course or off it, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The grape, ginger, lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the bev card. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5-hour energy shots today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The injury list continues to grow for the New York Jets at training camp. We talked about some of the injuries they suffered at the end of last week. Well, we can add guard John Simpson to that list. Aaron Glenn indicated he's probably going to miss a week or two with a back injury. So, it sounds kind of minor. I do worry a little bit because back injuries can linger. They can become chronic things, but it sounds like Simpson's going to miss some time. His projected return comes well before the season opener. So, he'll miss the preseason opener in Green Bay this coming weekend, but it's not clear Glenn's going to play his starters anyway. And if they do play, they probably won't play much. Today's NFL, you can love it or hate it. And I fall on the side of hating it, but teams just don't play their starters much during the exhibition season anymore. Teams are really afraid of injuries. Well, Simpson's already injured. So after the Simpson injury, at training camp, the Jets had a little shuffle on their offensive line. Josh Myers went in at center, and Joe Tippmann moved over to left guard. Now, it's not clear whether this is going to be an ongoing arrangement. It's very possible, at the next practice, Tippmann's back at center, Myers is at left guard. It's not a huge surprise to hear Myers go in because I think when the Jets signed Myers, the assumption was that he was going to be the top interior backup lineman. This is a guy with starting experience with the Green Bay Packers at center, multi-year starter, a guy who, if nothing else, credible player at his position, which is not true of many backups in the NFL. And the Jets have been having a camp battle at center between Myers and Tippmann. And it's clear that whoever loses that battle is going to become the top backup interior lineman in the NFL. But this brings up a couple interesting questions. The fact that they moved Tippmann to left guard. Now, I like the idea that Tippmann's got to compete for his job. I think that in the NFL, there's not enough competition. I think that when players become entrenched, they're just handed starting jobs. And I don't think that's always the best thing for a team. I think competition is never a bad thing. I do wonder a little bit about this move when Simpson's out. Do you move Tippmann to guard or do you put Myers at guard? Now, people will say like Myers doesn't have experience at guard, but Tippmann's experience is like 3 games and change from 2 years ago. He didn't really play that guard that much in college. So it's not like Tippmann's like some guard with 10 years of experience. He's played a handful of games, and the Jets stuck him out there when he had very minimal experience at guard to begin with. 2 years ago, Tippmann had virtually no experience at guard, and they stuck him out there. And now 2 years later, we're acting. I know a different coaching staff, but 2 years later, are we really acting like experience at guard is this huge thing? Typically the spot you move. If you have a young center you draft and you don't think he's ready to call out the protections yet, sometimes you stick him at guard. But I do think there's kind of an open question about where Tippmann ends up long term. I thought it was settled. And part of me feels like that when Tippmann showed he could handle the center position last year, you don't want to mess around with that too much. I know there's a camp battle right now, but at the end of the day, Tippmann did show that he could handle the center position. And I remember what happened with the Jets with Elijah Vera Tucker, where he showed he could handle the guard position. They kept moving him around because of injuries, and it didn't. I don't know that AVT got hurt because he kept playing tackle, but I don't think it really helped his development. I feel like for an offensive lineman, after you find the spot for him, you just keep him there. Olufashinu stepped in at the end of last year and played left tackle effectively, and I don't think you would ever move him again. I think once a guy finds a spot where he succeeds, I don't want to mess around with that. So if Myers beats Tippmann out for the starting center job, I can see that, then Tippmann becomes the backup. But if John Simpson goes down, I would think about moving Myers to guard because Tippmann's still a guy I think you're going to look at as a longer-term player for the Jets. But there's a counter argument to this. So the way I view it is this: there's an argument to be made for Tippmann playing guard. There's an argument to be made for Tippmann playing center. Now, at the guard position, you have a better chance of blocking guys one-on-one. Typically, because the center's snapping the ball, it's tough for him to do a one-on-one block because he's got to focus on snapping the ball as the play begins. And then after the snap is secured, then he can focus on blocking people. And this is one of the reasons, if you go back, 20, 25 years when the 3-4 defense was really prominent in the NFL, that's one of the reasons the 3-4 defense was difficult for offenses to deal with. Typically, the 3-4 defense, what they do is they would stick a big 330-pound guy right across from the center. And the center would have to deal with him right off the snap. So, teams came up with schematic things to deal with that, but it was a tough thing for centers to deal with. This day and age, there's less focus on like big space eating guys in the middle of a defensive line because it's such a passing league that defenses just want guys who can get after the quarterback, which means there aren't as many opportunities to block one-on-one at the center position. So if you put Tippmann at guard, we know he's a guy who can move people. We know he's a strong guy. We know he can open up holes. And you can make a case that putting him at guard gives him more opportunity to do that. Now, the flip side to this is the center position is a spot Tippmann showed he could handle. And Tippmann brings some skills to that position as well. First of all, Tippmann showed he could handle, dealing with the line assignments and all that. And we know like figuring out the line calls is kind of a duo between a quarterback and a center. They're kind of working in tandem. And we know Aaron Rodgers probably did a lot of the heavy lifting last year because Rodgers likes to control things at the line of scrimmage. But still, I think Tippmann showed that he can handle those responsibilities. Again, like I said, sometimes when a guy breaks into the league, even if you draft him to play center, that first year or so, you just stick him at guard so he doesn't have to worry about those responsibilities. Or sometimes what happens is you give the guard you give a veteran guard the responsibilities, just let the rookie center focus on snapping. Tippmann showed that he could handle those responsibilities. Tippmann, for a guy his size, is also very mobile. And when you can do things like pull a center, when you can move a center like after the snap, when you can have a center block guys all over the formation, it just opens up things in the run game. There are different types of plays you can call. And it's tougher for defenders because they know like they get blocked from a different angle. If the center can pull and block me as a linebacker on the play side, that makes my job more difficult. That's another guy I have to keep an eye out on because I don't want to be wiped out by him. So I think there's like a case to be made either way for where Tippmann should be long term. I would lean towards center just because he played that position effectively last year. But I think if Myers beats Tippmann out, then again, like Myers could be the center. But at the end of the day, like I still think no matter what, Tippmann's probably a long-term player for the Jets. And I don't think you want to like get and I know it's like offensive linemen change positions all the time, so I don't want to make it seem like that's going to be the thing that decides whether Joe Tippmann's an effective player or not in the NFL. But I'm a little uneasy about the idea of moving Tippmann up and down the line. Now, again, like this could just be like they're trying to get both guys look at both positions. We could end up with the next practice where Myers is playing left guard. And, the Jets need to find a line that works for them. Sometimes what happens in a situation like this, and I'm not saying it will with Simpson because I think Simpson's a good player, but sometimes what happens is a guy goes down and you find a mix that actually works a little bit better. I mean, could a mix where Tippmann's playing left guard and Myers is playing center work better than Simpson and Tippmann at left guard and center? I don't really know. So it'll be an interesting thing to monitor how the Jets handle this going forward. And I think that there's a lot of potential right answers. I guess that's what I'm coming. That's what it comes down to is I don't think that there's one definitive right answer for the team. I have my preferences. My preference would be for Tippmann to play center, but I think there are lots of different ways this could work out and potentially work out well for the New York Jets. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, Jets are hoping things work out well for them in 2025. And of course, training camp is the first step on that journey. So we're really focused on training camp. But you can focus too much on training camp. And a couple practices from the weekend show us why. We'll dive into that as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest place to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. And Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worrying out of buying. I don't just tell you about Game Time. I've used it myself on many occasions. Got amazing deals on last minute seats, not just for sports, but also you can go to comedy, you can go to theater, you can go to concerts. Game Time's the best place for last minute tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We are in the middle of Jets training camp now. Camp began well over a week ago. It's really the first step towards preparing for the season. And we have our first preseason game coming up this weekend when the Jets will take on the Green Bay Packers. And I'm sure we will overanalyze everything that happens during the exhibition season. We always do. We act like what happens during these preseason games really makes a big difference for the New York Jets. And then like the season begins, and by October, you probably would not remember a single detail from the preseason games. Well, before the preseason begins, we have training camp. If you think we overanalyze the exhibition games, you should see like what we say about these practices. And to quote the great philosopher Allen Iverson, we're talking about practice. During the regular season, we don't care if a guy has a bunch of good practices in a row. But during training camp, we act like it's the end all. And I think the biggest danger when you get to training camp is becoming obsessed with the day-to-day flow of who's up and who's down. This is something I've talked about a lot over the last couple of weeks, but I think we got the ultimate example of this on Friday and Saturday. So on Friday, Justin Fields had what was by most accounts his best practice of training camp so far. And the early reports of that Fields and the offense are kind of struggling most days at training camp. Then Saturday, after having his best day on Friday, Fields had what was his worst day, and the offense really just had an awful day at the office. So after Friday, you heard lots of reports Fields succeeded, and there were all these big takeaways about this should give the Jets hope. And then Saturday comes and they struggle, and there are all these big takeaways. Well, this is Jets fans should be concerned about this. And I think this shows you like kind of the silliness of reading too much into day-to-day events at practice. You have to remember that not only is it practice, but these guys are getting ready for the season. They're learning how to do things for the first time. A new playbook's being installed. Guys are getting used to their teammates. Fields is getting used to how his receivers run routes. It's not really worth getting too worked up about how Fields performs in these practices. And look, that's going to be true in the exhibition season. If the Jets give Fields a couple series and he drives them right down the field for a touchdown, it's not going to make that big of a difference. And if he really struggles, it's not really that big of an indicator. I mean, I can go down the list. I remember in 2019, the Jets of the Adam Gase year, Adam Gase's first year, the Jets preseason opener was against the Giants. Their first team offense played a series. They rolled right down the field for a touchdown. And people were actually saying, well, the Jets have a great offensive mind at Adam Gase. This proves it. 2 years later, they played the Giants in preseason, their first game. Zach Wilson played pretty well. And I heard people say, well, the Jets have a franchise. This proves the Jets have a franchise quarterback. And these were actual games. Now we're talking about practice. You have to remember that guys are getting ready for the season. You never want to draw any sweeping conclusions about practice, but you especially should not focus on the events of one day. What I look for are more like longer term storylines, things that you hear consistently, and specific things. One of the things we've heard frequently is that this is a tough camp Aaron Glenn's running. Now, Robert Saleh last year told us he was running a tough camp. Robert Saleh at one point last year actually compared it to the Junction Boys, which was a very famous tough training camp Bear Bryant ran when he was the head coach, a legendary college coach ran when he was the head coach at Texas A&M, which ESPN turned into an original movie like 25 years or so ago. And I think looking back, we can say that Jets camp was not all that tough last year. This year, Jets camp was tougher. And one of the things I've talked about over the last couple of weeks on the show is that a tougher training camp could get you ready to play. It could give you a little advantage early in the season, because in today's NFL, it feels like the first 2-3 weeks, guys are kind of playing themselves into game shape. Guys may be in great physical condition. Look, an NFL player during the offseason is in better shape than any of us could ever dream of being. But there's a difference between being in great shape and being in great football shape. That means you're used to, the flow of a game. You're used to, saving some energy for the end of the game. It means you're used to taking hits. These things take time to get used to. You can be in phenomenal physical condition, which all NFL players are, and not be in great football condition. And I think the way training camps conducted these days and the way teams don't utilize the exhibition season, there's something to be said for being a little tougher. I mean, look how sloppy the tackling is the first couple of weeks of the season every year. There's something I think that this could be a good thing for the Jets. I think this could be the type of thing. Maybe you hope the Jets will be a little sharper than their opponents the first couple of weeks of the season, if they actually are, having a camp that's this tough. Another storyline that we've heard consistently is that the rookie wide receiver, the 4th round pick, Arian Smith, showing pretty good hands, which is a positive thing, because one of the red flags about Arian Smith when the Jets drafted him in the 4th round was he just had an enormous drop rate. I mean, it went beyond a high drop rate. It was a staggering amount of drops that he had in college. And the Jets seemed to think there was a mechanical fix for that. And so far in training camp, it doesn't mean when the lights come on that Smith's going to catch everything, because there's a difference between something happening at training camp and something happening on the field. We see that a lot. I mean, sometimes you hear about a guy who's playing great in camp, and then the exhibition season starts and he can't do anything, and he'll never even make the regular season roster. But the first step for Arian Smith becoming a receiver with reliable hands is him showing it in training camp practices. And by all accounts, he's done that so far. It doesn't mean Arian Smith's going to be a great receiver. I think the red flags about him, or the question marks about him, went well beyond dropping passes, but it's a positive thing. It's something you can feel good about hearing. But it's something that's happened over the course of many practices. You wouldn't, after one practice, you wouldn't say Arian Smith caught a bunch of passes, his drop problems are cured. We now have over a week worth of discussion that Arian Smith is looking pretty good catching the football. So now you can start to build hope, but it has to continue. And that's what training camp's all about. It's about kind of first impressions. It's not about making sweeping conclusions. Justin Fields has a good day at the office. That doesn't mean Justin Fields is going to be great this year. Justin Fields has a lousy day at the office. It doesn't mean Justin Fields is going to be lousy this year. It's really about kind of just the first act. And you'd like to hear Justin Fields put together a string of good practices, one after another. But one day up, one day down, that's not really going to tell us anything about where the Jets are heading in 2025. It's tough. It's a tough time of year because we don't really have a lot of news. We've been waiting for months for training camp to begin because there's been no football news for a while. And now we finally have practices to break down. And there's a tendency to overanalyze them. So my challenge to you is don't overanalyze them. Take them for what they're worth and look for the longer term trends. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show or listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.